UFC Vegas 76, Strickland versus Magomedov takes place this weekend, and I'm going to go through the entire card, starting with the early prelims, ending with the main event, giving my prediction and breakdown for every single fight on the card, starting with the early prelim opener of Guram Kutateladze versus Elves Brener. I'm going to be going with Guram Kutateladze, and I just want to point out, before even saying why I'm giving this prediction, to pick Guram Kutateladze to win, that this is a really unfair situation for Elves Brener. I'm going to be real with you. He's a young dude, 25 years of age, actually does have like a win over Zubaira Tukhugov in his debut, which is pretty impressive, to be honest, because Zubaira Tukhugov, although he's not the best, he is a decently okay fighter. But he was on a 2-fight win streak before that, stepped into the UFC. He was supposed to be fighting Jordan Levitt on this card. On short notice, he has been given Guram Kutateladze. I couldn't think of a more different style in the lightweight division for him to have to deal with. He was waiting for like the very non-athletic, slow striking of Jordan Levitt, and maybe the sort of wet blanket style takedown game of Jordan Levitt as well. And now he's taking on super fast, super dangerous Guram Kutateladze. I think is going to be a shock to the system, and judging by Guram Kutateladze taking this fight on short notice after pulling out of his last one, that injury can't have been too severe. Maybe it was just a bit of swelling or something that he was waiting to go down. I'm going to go with Guram Kutateladze getting this one done by TKO. His performance against Ismagulov showed me that he is top 15 level in the UFC lightweight division. I'm going to be going with Guram Kutateladze to start off the card. We move on to another fight up the card, Alexandr Romanov versus Blagoy Ivanov. I'm going to go with Alexandr Romanov here over Blagoy Ivanov. I have to pick Romanov to win. This is a bit weird though, because I could see a world where Ivanov's experience could keep him alive in this fight against Romanov early on, and maybe then he could come back later on, because I mean, Alexandr Romanov's performance against Alexander Volkov was one of the worst performances we have seen in recent heavyweight history. I mean, take aside everyone who's ever fought Jailton Almeida, that was one of the worst performances in recent UFC heavyweight history. He went out there, had a takedown stuffed, and then basically just gave up and let himself get TKO'd by Volkov. So it is worrying to pick him here, but Blagoy Ivanov is fat and unathletic, and I think Alexandr Romanov, who could out-grapple Marcin Tybura, who could out-grapple Blagoy Ivanov, is going to be able to out-grapple Blagoy Ivanov. I'm going to go with his signature forearm choke. Seems to be the choke that he goes for on the fatties in the heavyweight division, maybe because he already knows that their breathing is already restricted by the pounds of fat around their lungs. So he's adding on to that with the forearm choke. So I think that Alexandr Romanov gets this one done. He out-grappled Tybura early in their fight until cardio kicked in for Tybura. They were at altitude at there as well. I think that was the Salt Lake City card that they fought on. So I'm going to pick that Alexandr Romanov can out-grapple the guy who out-grappled Blagoy Ivanov, I think. But we'll see how it goes, because Alexandr Romanov did out-grapple Tybura, who out-grappled Ivanov. Little bit of MMA algebra there with the grappling, but I don't really know what else to go off of for this fight. It seems like Blagoy Ivanov isn't adding any new wrinkles into his game. He's adding new wrinkles onto his face. He's getting up there in age, but I am going to go with Romanov. I think he'll be humbled by these two back-to-back losses and really put some effort in to win this one against a 36-year-old Blagoy Ivanov. We move on to another fight up the card, which is Joanderson Brito versus Westin Wilson. Another interesting matchup that they've made here, skill-wise. I'm going to have to go with Joanderson Brito here. I feel like Joanderson Brito arguably could be looking at getting a fight that's going to get him ranked number 15 in the featherweight division. He's a very good fighter. He's on a bit of momentum recently. He's had, I think, how many wins in a row has he had? 2 in a row over decent competition. Beat Lucas Alexander, subbed him in the first round. Before that, KO'd Andre Fili with one punch. So it's like, this guy is good. Bill Algeo was able to beat him. So there is a level of veteran that's tricky that could do well against him. But I just don't see that being the case for Westin Wilson. He trains at Upstate Karate in Wonderboy's gym. I can just see Brito getting his back and subbing him in the first round by rear naked choke. He trains with Stephen Thompson. He lost to Teruto Ishihara on the regional scene last year by KO before he got himself into the UFC. He does have a fun style, but I think he's going to give up his back at some point. He has a lot of subs as well, funnily enough. He's actually pretty good in the submission department. Has a ton of them on his record. So I'm not saying that's an absolute gap in his skill there, but I am going to go with Brito's grappling being a little bit too much for Westin Wilson here. So I am going to go with the grappling of Joanderson Brito. I reckon he'll get this one done by submission in the first round. Rear naked choke is what I'm going to go with. We move on to another fight up the card, which is Ivana Petrovic versus Luana Carolina. Luana Carolina lost to Molly McCann. Just going to let that sink in with you guys right now before I make my prediction. I'm probably going to go with Petrovic here over Luana Carolina. She's 6-0, undefeated, coming off a win at Aries FC against a 7-1 female opponent. Rear naked choke in the 4th round, so she showed she had good cardio. She went into the later rounds. She has a couple other decent wins, a split decision to a 5-4 girl. Not the best to see, but she has a lot of amateur experience as well. She went 5-1 as an amateur. Now she's gone undefeated as a pro. I think it's just you kind of have to pick her to beat Luana Carolina here, who has lost to Molly McCann and Joanne Calderwood back-to-back. She looked okay against Joanne Calderwood, but I'm going to trust in the undefeated up-and-comer in Ivana Petrovic, because even Calderwood's losing her step a little bit, and she was still able to beat Luana Carolina. So, yeah, I'm going to go with Ivana Petrovic. But Luana Carolina's not bad. She beat Lupita Godinez, but she's way larger than Lupita Godinez at a higher weight class. So I'm going with Petrovic. Luana Carolina isn't going to get this one done. But knowing women's MMA, she probably wins by wheel kick. We move on to another fight up the card. Yana Santos, otherwise formerly known as Yana Kunitskaya, versus Karol Rosa. I'm going to go with Karol Rosa here. I actually think she's quite technically sound as a fighter. She didn't have a decent performance in her last one. She lost to Norma Jamont, but Norma Jamont's pretty good at boxing, pretty good at the basics as well. Karol Rosa had a win over Lena Landsberg, Betchko Hea, Jocelyn Edwards. Jocelyn Edwards is pretty good to get a win over, to be honest with you, because she's quite tricky and rangy on the feet. So I am going to go with Karol Rosa. I don't see her getting out-grappled by Yana Santos. I was going to say Kunitskaya again. And I think that I'm just going to... It's women's MMA. Like, what do you want from me, man? Like, there's no logic. Whatever happens, happens. I'm going with Karol Rosa. Like, get off my back, man. We move on. Why are you asking me for all this evidence and explanations? It's a fucking coin flip anyway. I'm going with Rosa. Move on up the card. Sorry. God, women's MMA picks are giving me PTSD. Kevin Lee versus Rinat Fakhretdinov. I'm going with Rinat Fakhretdinov because Kevin Lee made Diego Sanchez look good in his last fight with him. And that is absolutely pathetic. Kevin Lee used to be actually somewhat good earlier in his career when he was on a run in the lightweight division. And he beat Efrain Escudero, Jake Matthews by first round TKO, Magomed Mustafayev by second round rear naked choke, choked out Trinaldo in round 2. And this is when Trinaldo was reasonably I think Trinaldo, this is when he was quite young. He was in his 50s when he fought Kevin Lee. So he was 21-4 and Kevin Lee choked him out, choked out Michael Chiesa, beat up on Edson Barboza. He had a great run in the lightweight division, but it's very clear something has changed when you go from absolutely manhandling Edson Barboza and KOing Gregor Gillespie to almost losing against Diego Sanchez and making him look good. I'm going to go with Rinat Fakhretdinov. He's looking good recently. He's a monster of a guy in that division. 21-2, 31 years of age, in his prime as well. Russian, name ends with an OV. How much more do you want me to list for you here? No, but he dominated Brian Battle in his last fight, and Brian Battle has proven that he's probably the best guy from that tough season. He won it, obviously, but there was still some controversy between him and Tresean Gore. But he beat Tresean Gore in the UFC. He was the better guy from that tough season, and he's becoming a bit of a prospect in the welterweight division as well. But Rinat Fakhretdinov dominated him, absolutely dominated him start to finish. And I'm going to have to go over Rinat over Kevin Lee. I hope Kevin Lee wins, but I think he needs to finish early over Rinat, because even if you think Kevin Lee can scramble with Rinat Fakhretdinov, which I think is a tough ask, even if he does do it for the first round, maybe that could be possible. How long can he do it for? How long can he keep up with Rinat for. Because we've seen Kevin Lee take on a guy who's stepping in on short notice in D-Rod, and Kevin Lee's the one gassing out in the later rounds. So unless Kevin Lee reinvents himself here, I'm definitely going to go over Rinat Fakhretdinov. I reckon he just dominates Kevin Lee in the later rounds and gets like a third round TKO or rear naked choke. We move on. Up the card, Ruziboev versus Bruno Ferreira. This is an interesting matchup. Nursulton, Ruziboev. I was almost going to pick Ruziboev. Almost. He is all right. Oh, am I going to? It's all a coin flip anyway. It's middleweight. It's the middleweight division. Do I just coin flip it and go with the underdog? I don't know. I'm going to go with Bruno Ferreira. Ruziboev is good. Good striking, good wrestling as well, ish. We're going to talk about it because you look at his record and you see, oh my God, finish here, finish there. I think he has what? Someone on my Instagram said this guy's got 20 finishes by sub. It could be interesting, but I feel like a lot of his submission wins are coming against lackluster opponents on his record and also guys who are on top of him in the grappling, and he'll end up getting it off of his back. I don't see Bruno Ferreira shooting a takedown on this Uzbekistani guy with a V at the end of his name. You don't shoot takedowns on a guy with V at the end of their name. And I think Bruno Ferreira knows that. And I've seen the striking of Nursulton Ruziboev. He may have improved because he's taken a lot of time off since his last fight. He's taken a whole year off a year and a bit off since he fought 12-12 Masaliski, which was a short notice fill-in opponent that he dominated in the first round. So he was scheduled to fight someone a bit better than that at first. And he has beaten some decent opponents. But I think Bruno Ferreira, weirdly strong, little tank of a guy in that division, going to be hard to take down, and he's got too much power. And watching Ruziboev, if you look at his highlights, he's so open on the feet to getting chinned. And if you're open on the feet to getting chinned, Bruno Ferreira's the guy to chin you. So I'm going to go with Bruno Ferreira, losing at first, maybe getting outstruck, stuffing a couple of takedowns, being pushed up against the cage, eventually in the pocket, he lands that big shot and puts away Ruziboev by KO. But Ruziboev's good. But I'll go Bruno Ferreira. Finishing ability, strong, dangerous. Just beat Gregory Rodriguez, whose chin is a bit hit and miss. But Ruziboev, it's hard to know how good he is yet. We don't really know. And a lot of his subs are him off of his back. I don't see Ferreira putting him on his back. And on the feet, watch his highlights. I actually did research for this one, so it's probably wrong. But go and check the highlights of Ruziboev, and you tell me if he's open on the feet to some stuff. He's real sloppy on the feet, and I will say this as well, really soy frame, really soy posture, soy frame, soy build, seems weak. He just looks like a weakling, so I'm definitely going to be going with Bruno Ferreira here. Strength advantage, power advantage, finishing ability advantage, on the feet especially. I'm going to go for Ferreira. We move on, up the card, Benoit Saint-Denis versus Ismael Bonfim. Speaking of more mismatches, I'm going to go with Ismael Bonfim over Benoit Saint-Denis here. Another no-brainer in my opinion. Ismael Bonfim he was good before he fought McKinney, but we didn't really know too much about him back then, and McKinney was always dangerous, and he flying knee KO'd Terence McKinney. That was his coming out party. He also beat Abasov, 28-3 opponent on the Contender Series, beat him by decision. Before that, 12-2. Before that, 10-1. You know what I mean? He's had a few in a row against really good level competition at LFA before he even got to the Contender Series in UFC, and now he's coming off a wicked flying knee KO over Terence McKinney, and you're putting him in there against Benoit Saint-Denis, who is good and great at grappling, but the Bonfim brothers, although they strike quite a bit, and maybe Gabriel is known a bit more for his grappling over Ismael at this recent point in time, Ismael's really good at grappling as well, really good takedown defense, and I reckon he's going to be able to stuff anything Benoit Saint-Denis tries to shoot on him, and in the later rounds, that's when we're going to see Bonfim bouncing around, making Benoit Saint-Denis sort of shudder up against the cage, really hesitate on everything he throws, and I think I can see Ismael Bonfim getting a second round TKO over Benoit Saint-Denis after stuffing a couple of his early takedowns. I think Ismael Bonfim could move up and beat Elves dos Santos. I think he could, and I think Gabriel Bonfim would beat him as well. And Elves dos Santos worked Benoit Saint-Denis. So I'm going to go with Ismael Bonfim here by TKO in the second round. We move on up the card to another fight, which is Ariane Lipski versus Melissa Gatto. All the logic in the world is pointing me towards Melissa Gatto here. because she's rangy. She beats Ciara Eubanks, who's a man, and she beat her very impressively as well by finishing her with a front kick to the body. So she is good, and she did submit Karol Rosa, which is a really good win as well. And Ariane Lipski, she's lost Priscilla Cachoeira and Antonina Shevchenko and Molly McCann, So I got to go with Melissa Gatto here. I reckon she wins. She didn't look great in her last fight against Tracy Cortez, but she's very young, 27 years of age, and she took a lot of time off after her loss to Tracy Cortez to try and improve. She hasn't fought in over a year, so I'm going to go with her looking better in this fight and beating the likes of Ariane Lipski here by submission off of her back. I reckon maybe she'll be on bottom and she'll latch up an armbar is what I'm going to go with there. So I'll go with Melissa Gatto. I think she's more likely to win. We move on. Up the card, Max Griffin versus Michael Morales. This is a really interesting matchup as well, because although Max Griffin's record doesn't suggest it, and 90-something% or 88% of people on Tapology are picking Michael Morales, this is a dangerous fight for him because although he's undefeated and people see that and think, oh my God, what a prospect, he has looked sloppy in his recent fights. I rewatched his fight against Adam Fugit and he didn't look the best in certain moments in that fight, but managed to rally and come back in the third round and get a TKO. I say rally like he was losing, but there were moments in that fight where it was like, oh, I don't know about his stand-up. Oh, I don't know about that. He looked a bit off there. So there were a couple of red flags in his last performance, but he took a year off. And I like when people take a year off. You know what I mean? Took a year off, pulled out of a fight with Rinat Fakhretdinov. Smart move, in my opinion. Give himself a bit more time before he deals with those levels of opponent. I reckon he's going to be good enough to win. Didn't really beat too many great opponents on the regional scene, but had a ton of experience. And recently he's been looking okay. So I do think he beats the likes of Max Griffin, who couldn't get past Neil Magny. And that does mean you're trash. So I am going to have to go with Michael Morales here. On talent, I think he's way above Max Griffin. And Max Griffin as well seems to be so on and off in his career, so hit and miss with his performances, whereas Michael Morales, even if he doesn't seem like a world beater, at least he's consistent with his performances, and he's got momentum, and he's 24 years of age, and he's got a 3-inch reach advantage, and this fight's probably going to be on the feet. I'm going to have to go with Michael Morales here over Max Griffin, who's just too hit and miss, getting older, and has had a lot of time off recently as well, if I check back. Let me have a little look. Max Griffin last fought, in October of last year, split decision with Tim Means. I think Michael Morales finishes Tim Means. We're going to go with Michael Morales. We move on to a co-main event of Damir Ismagulov versus Grant Dawson. I know of the fight between Grant Dawson and Ricky Glenn. Therefore, I'm picking Damir Ismagulov. I don't think Grant Dawson has the level of wrestling that some of these other guys have. I know he just out-wrestled an Olympian in Mark Madsen, but Mark Madsen's wrestling is, Greco-Roman, and sometimes I don't translate too well, and they end up doing better in the clinch exchanges than they do with the other types of takedowns that could come up. He did win against Mark Madsen and look good, but I think Damir Ismagulov showed in the Arman Sarukian fight an ability to keep on getting back up and keep on scrapping. And he was neutralized by Arman somewhat in that fight, which is why Arman won by getting the control and getting hooks on the back. And Grant Dawson was saying in his interview with Renato Moicano on Money Moicano's channel, he was saying that he's looking to get the hooks in on the back on Damir and keep him there. But I've seen the fight with Ricky Glenn and leading into a fight with Damir. That is the biggest red flag I could ever see in my entire life. That is such a red flag. Ricky Glenn looked terrible. Absolutely senile in his last fight that he had, by the way. I picked him to win that based on his performance against Grant Dawson, and he looked literally half speed compared to Christos Giagos. Go back and watch that fight. He looked like an old man in there. Terrible. Maybe he just fell off after the Grant Dawson fight, but the fact that he arguably could have probably got a finish at the end of the third round against Grant Dawson is a worry, because if Damir Ismagulov starts seeing you slow down in your grappling and start seeing you not get as many takedowns as maybe you once were in round one, he's going to start putting some heat on you. And Grant Dawson's chin is routinely up in the air in his fights. It's routinely up in the air. He does a lot of teep kicks, and he tries going to the face with him at times, and he ends up just sort of going up on his rear leg, on one leg, on his toe, and just rearing his chin up in the air when he tries to throw this stuff. So I feel like he's going to get chinned by Damir at one point randomly at the end of round 2, is how I see this fight. I see him grappling, trying to put dominant position on Damir. Damir escaping it, getting back up, shaking it off, but being held down a bit and being held against a cage and trying to work his distance and separate from the clinch with Dawson. I think eventually in the second round, some of those takedowns are going to start failing. At the end of the first, the same situation as well. And at the end of the second, I think we're going to see Dawson trapped on the feet with Damir Ismagulov, who's going to chin him with a straight right hand. I reckon. Damir Ismagulov gets it done. We move on. I'm burping all over the place. We move on to the main event. I'm going with Damir Ismagulov. But the main event is Sean Strickland versus Abus Magomedov. This is the big prediction of the card. At one moment, I was going to go with Abus Magomedov, but there's been so many middleweight fights since this fight has been announced that it's really hit home how terrible everyone other than Whittaker and Adesanya, and maybe now Cannonier, is in the middleweight division. So I was worried, but everyone's terrible at middleweight. All of them are. Abus Magomedov hasn't really fought great. He's fought some opponents, but let's not forget he lost to Lewis Taylor by KO. You know what I mean? And some of the guys he fought maybe weren't in their prime at the time that he fought them as well. And he does have some impressive finishes in his career, but then there's other fights that, 7-3 opponent he's taken to a decision and stuff like that. And if you can't get Sean Strickland out of there in round 1, which is very difficult to do unless he walks towards you like an NPC like he did with Alex Ferreira, like his controller disconnected, I think Strickland will know that he has to get through round 1, and if he does get through round 1, the finishing rate of Abus Magomedov plummets off a cliff and almost always goes straight to a decision if he does get out of round 1. So I think in a decision, which is very likely to happen here, I think Strickland is going to be too experienced, too much, and I think he's going to do what he did to Nursulton, but this time he has a full camp rather than 1 week's notice. Nursulton, here's the way I see this matchup as well. We know Abus Magomedov somewhat good. His surname is Magomedov. We get it. He's somewhat good. But I used to think Nursulton was really good. Here's the difference. Nursulton had already proven to us when he was fighting Sean Strickland, when he was about to fight Sean Strickland, he had already proven to us that he was top 15 level in the UFC middleweight division. He'd proven that to us. Abus Magomedov has proven that he's better than Dustin Stoltzfus. Welcome to the population of Earth, okay? You're better than Dustin Stoltzfus. Congratulations. That's not convincing enough and not enough evidence for me to suggest that he beats Sean Strickland, who is a top contender in the middleweight division. And again, after watching Cannonier Vettori, I'm like, how did Strickland make it that close with Cannonier and arguably win? I think Cannonier is a much more dangerous guy on the feet to deal with than Abus Magomedov is right now that we know of. And if I'm using that logic that we know of, rather than guessing that Abus is the next fucking savior of the middleweight division that's going to absolutely run through everyone, if we use logic and what we do know, you have to pick Strickland. You're picking Abus Magomedov if you are guessing what he will become. From what we know right now, Strickland ain't Dustin Stoltzfus. I don't see him getting KO'd in the first round. He keeps his eyes open. He sees all the shots coming a lot of the time. I don't think Abus is that slick to hide a shot from him like an Alex Pereira would be able to. So I'm going to go with Sean Strickland doing what he did to Nursulton and wearing down Abus as the fight goes on, and maybe getting a late rounds TKO over Abus Magomedov. The forward pressure is going to stop Abus from being able to get creative with his kicks in the first round. He's going to be on the back foot. I think he's going to start boxing a bit more. I think eventually the fight will get more comfortable and Strickland will get more comfortable, and Abus will be in a main event in his second ever UFC fight, and it will all come down on top of him. I'm going to go with Strickland's pressure being too much and him getting a late rounds TKO or a decision based on those later rounds. Like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Toodle pip. I'll see you later. Actually a good card to look forward to, so we'll see how I do on predictions. Goodbye.